Shalom and welcome to Israel Policy Pod. I'm your host, Shanie Reichman, the Director of Strategic Initiatives and of IPF Atid here at Israel Policy Forum. I'm joined by Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor with Israel Policy Forum. Welcome, Neri.
Hi, Shanie. Good to be back with you after a couple of months.
Yeah, it's good to chat with you. So much has happened since we last spoke in November. We luckily will not cover all of that, but we will start by looking at the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. Where are they going, and what happens if they go nowhere? And of course, the fabulous news of the last remaining hostage returning from Gaza, the body of Gvili, and what that means for Israeli society and at a policy level to have his body returning home, closing this horrific chapter for Israel and the diaspora. Then we'll move on to developments in the Gaza Strip when it comes to the Rafah crossing and looking to phase 2 of Trump's plan. And then we'll talk about my hometown in New York City to discuss how things are looking 1 month into the Mamdani administration. How's that sound, Neri?
Sounds very comprehensive, Shanie. A lot of things to discuss, both of the past week and in recent days, and then also in the coming days and perhaps in the coming weeks. So yeah, around the horn. And I'm looking forward to hearing how things are on your side of the world, because I spend way too much time thinking about things and obsessing about things on my side of the world, what may happen, as I'm sure you're aware.
Well, we could have said this any time in the last few weeks and months, but right now Trump and Khamenei are threatening each other again. And things are moving pretty quickly, even in the last few hours. So what's the latest in terms of negotiations between the two? And what's the likelihood of a shakeup this week? Because, of course, Israel will be the usual recipient if there are any Iranian strikes. So it will affect you, how things go here.
It most certainly will. And we can kind of get into what may happen and, the Israel of it all and the Israel input of it all. But look, as I'm sure our listeners and viewers know, because we've discussed this at length since early January, when Nason Rafferty was on right after the domestic protests and turmoil erupted in Iran, and he gave a very good analysis of how he got here and what was happening inside Iran. And then I think about 2 weeks ago, we had my friend Yaakov Lapin on to discuss more the kind of military security side of it. It was also when Trump continued threatening the Islamic Republic in Iran to stop shooting its own people on the streets. They didn't quite listen. But as of now, the protests have been quashed, unfortunately. The regime seems to have kind of shot its way out of the domestic turmoil. And yet Donald Trump's threats have continued. And as we all know, and as I discussed with Yaakov 2 weeks ago, there's been this growing buildup of U.S. military force all across the Middle East. So we've seen on a kind of almost daily basis or every few days, F-15 squadrons being moved into the region, air defenses, heavy bombers. Obviously, a U.S. carrier strike group, the Lincoln, has now finally reached the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf and is sitting off the coast of Iran. So really, this military buildup by the Trump administration, combined with continued threats, by the way, not only by the Americans, but also by the Iranians, that if a strike does happen, then it won't be a limited response by Iran. Fine. So threat, counter threat, military buildup. And as of at least yesterday, we thought there would be negotiations being held on Friday in Turkey. So basically, the way it all started is that there was this domestic turmoil in Iran. If we kind of zoom out a little bit, Donald Trump got angry at it, threatened the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic didn't quite heed those threats. But what started as really kind of Donald Trump, I don't want to say obsession, but a focus on what was happening inside Iran has now expanded to, once again, Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile program, its support for various kind of terrorist groups and militias and proxies all across the region. And now it may have kind of come back down to the Iranian nuclear program, which ostensibly is what they're going to discuss first on Friday in Turkey in these negotiations. That's essentially kind of the zoom out of how we've gotten here really over the past month. Obviously, there was not only a sense, but a real possibility that a few weeks ago, Donald Trump was seriously considering launching strikes on Iran when, I don't want to say the protests were at their peak, but there were still some unrest on the streets of Iran. That actually didn't happen for all we know. And I think it's pretty good information. He kind of backed down at the last minute. So everyone here in Israel, trust me, was convinced that there would be strikes by the Americans last weekend, or 2 weekends ago rather. Also, this weekend, there was also very strong awareness, shall we say, about a potential strike. That obviously did not happen. So now we're looking at the diplomatic track. And really, it seemed to be set for Friday. Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy for pretty much everything, is he right now.
He's a busy guy, isn't he?
He's a very busy guy. Kind of a tangent, but someone made the point, I think, online earlier today, where never in U.S. diplomatic history has one person been responsible for negotiating. Steve Witkoff is here, and he just finished meeting with Bibi Netanyahu and senior Israeli military officials over Gaza, but obviously primarily over Iran. So he's responsible for Gaza. He's going to negotiate Iran with the Iranians on Friday. And in between, he's set to travel to the United Arab Emirates to broker, hopefully, an agreement and a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. So the point was that never in U.S. diplomatic history has one person been tasked with mediating 3 very, very difficult conflicts in the matter of, 4 days. So best of luck to Steve. But I digress. The talks were set for Friday. And we should mention that the Qataris, the Turks, and the Egyptians actually, we thought, succeeded in brokering these talks. But really, over the past few hours, reports came out that the Iranians may be balking, that they may not want to hold the talks in Istanbul. They want to move it to Oman. They don't want all of these various Arab and Muslim countries to be around the table. So again, our listeners will be a lot smarter than we are. Hopefully those talks proceed. But that's essentially where we are in terms of the state of play. Again, we kind of zoomed out initially and kind of explained what's been happening here literally on an hourly basis. It does seem that the Trump administration wants to at least try for a diplomatic agreement.
Well, what would a deal between Iran and the United States actually look like? Noting that there is a version of a deal that satisfies Donald Trump's concerns, but doesn't satisfy the Israeli side of the equation.
So you pose a very good question. Look, there are 2 main players, and then there's also, again, kind of the Israel position, which I'll get into. But you have 3 problems here in terms of negotiation. Number one, the Iranians say they only want to discuss the nuclear file, right? Because it's quite convenient for them to leave out the missiles and the support for the proxies. And so the thinking is, from the people I talk to, that a deal on the nuclear program is actually potentially doable, not least because a lot of the nuclear program has already been destroyed. So, there's less of the Iranians to kind of, for the Iranians to cling to, coming after last year's 12-day war with Israel and also the U.S. and the B-2 bombers. So that's kind of the Iranian position. We don't want to talk about anything. We're not willing to talk about anything other than the nuclear program. Fine. The Americans, like I said, started off with all kinds of demands, even public demands by Trump and also especially by Steve Witkoff. It's unclear to us whether those demands are going to be raised if the talks happen on Friday. And so that we have to kind of wait and see. And then the third issue is the Israeli position. And it's not just an Israeli position. It's other kind of more hardline analysts and people in Washington and hawks, as we call them. Their position is, and I was told this this morning, and by the way, we should mention we're recording this Tuesday evening, Tel Aviv time, in case anything changes. It's not our fault. It's just how time works. It's linear. It moves forward, not backwards, and doesn't stand still. But the issue really is that, I heard this morning, Israel wants all of it, right? And I know this for a fact. Bibi Netanyahu, when he met with Steve Witkoff earlier today, said Israel's position is, there should be 0 uranium enrichment allowed by the Iranians. The Iranians have to give up kind of this 400 kilos of highly enriched uranium that are probably buried underground somewhere after last June's war. They want to kind of shipped out of the country. They want, this is a big one, they want the Iranians to limit production of their ballistic missile arsenal, and they also want Iran to stop funding and supporting the various proxies across the region. Those are maximalist demands that no Iran analyst worth their salt thinks that this regime in Tehran will be able to agree to. So you kind of already see the gaps, right? And fundamentally, amongst these various kind of positions and players, only one thing really matters, and that's what Donald Trump wants, right? And it's not unique to Donald Trump, although Donald Trump is a unique president, but it ultimately always comes down to one person sitting in the White House and making a decision. And by the way, that was true for President Biden during the Gaza war. Ultimately, his even senior officials and other people in the administration could have certain positions, could give certain pieces of advice, but ultimately it comes down to what one person wants. Far be it from me to get into Donald Trump's head, but this is really the kind of maddening situation where every conversation anyone here in Israel has or has been having for almost a month is really, oh, well, Donald Trump, because he gave that ultimatum a month ago about the domestic turmoil in Iran, won't back down, and that this is a red line, and then he'll demand, nothing less than Iran's capitulation, maybe. And there are other people who try to get into Trump's mind and say, well, Trump doesn't like military entanglements. He ran against them, obviously, his entire political career over the past, 10 plus years. He likes quick, decisive military actions. This is likely to get messy if we take the Iranians at their word. It'll likely be quite big. It's not going to be a snatch and grab job like against Maduro in Venezuela or even the B-2 bombers last June. So he's kind of should take that into consideration. And those people, that argument trying to get into Trump's head, they say, well, he's going to go for a deal. The Iranians just need to give him kind of this victory at the negotiating table, the art of the deal, and he'll be placated by that. But no one really knows for sure. And then kind of complicating matters is that earlier today, even the last few hours, the Iranians have been doing things that, shall we say, have not been quite productive. So not only reportedly making these demands about the actual negotiations that were so set to take place on Friday, moving the location, changing the kind of the outer envelope in terms of who's around the table, but they flew a drone too close to a U.S. aircraft carrier in the Gulf. So it was shot down by F-35, seen as posing a threat to the carrier. And then a few hours later, the Iranians, perhaps in retaliation, tried to stop a U.S. Navy tanker in the Persian Gulf. Now, again, will Trump, will we finish this podcast and will we see a tweet by Trump? Maybe. Or maybe he'll ignore it. But again, nobody knows, right? Are there still going to be negotiations? Nobody knows. So we'll be hopefully a lot smarter after Friday, either way. And so this is kind of the fluid situation that we're in. And trust me, me and everyone else have been trying to figure out what may happen, what may not happen. Are negotiations going to work? Are they not? But the bottom line is that people aren't, how shall I put this? People aren't that confident that if and when they get around a table, wherever it might be, the minimum Iran can give the Americans will not meet kind of the maximum request made by the Trump administration. That is the crux of the art of the deal. Remains to be seen.
Moving back to our Israel focus, the body of Ran Gvili finally returned home. And there was a sense that nothing can move forward in Israel until the last hostage returns. And now that he has, where do we actually go from here? What is the feeling in Israel now that there are no remaining hostages or bodies in captivity in Gaza for the first time in many, many years?
So it was a very positive day last Monday when news came that the IDF had actually found Ran Gvili's body on the outskirts of Gaza City in this cemetery. Let me just say, Shanie, it wasn't a given that he would be found. I kind of maybe hinted at it in previous episodes, but for a long time, his body had just disappeared. And very few people that I talked to were confident that he could be found. And yet they did find him, eventually, which is amazing for him, his family, his loved ones, and really all of Israel. So yeah, not the sense that the war is over, but a real sense of closure that after 800 and plus days since October 7th, and really, by the way, going back 14 years, it's the first time in 14 years that there isn't an Israeli hostage in Hamas captivity since, 2014. So that's 12 years. Yeah. So 12 years. And that's not a small thing, even before October 7th, even before this mass kind of hostage taking. So there was a real sense of closure, a real sense of happiness for the Gvili family, because the guy was a real hero, a policeman who was recovering from shoulder surgery. So he was not on duty. He was at home recovering, and he, of his own volition, chose to head down to southern Israel, to the Gaza envelope, to fight and defend the kibbutzim and moshavim down there. And and fell, in the line of duty, even though he wasn't officially on duty. So that was a big thing. And then, the war since last October, for practical purposes has kind of ended. There's a ceasefire, obviously, even though there's still clashes and troops inside Gaza and around Gaza. But the real kind of lingering issue for most Israelis was the hostages. And, dozens of them, both living and dead, were returned quite quickly after the October ceasefire. But Gvili was still there. And in every public statement by every hostage who had returned, by a relative of a hostage member who had returned, to say nothing of Gvili's family, and public officials, mentioned the fact that yes, we're still waiting for one more hostage to come home. So it was a good day, and it was interesting too. If we want to get kind of into the politics of it, right? So that evening, when Gvili's remains were identified and brought back to Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a press conference. This kind of, Netanyahu likes to give press conferences when he has good news to report, when he has positive news to take credit for. So he got up there and, yes, he did bring all the hostages back home. That is on a technical level correct. And yet, right, the vast majority of the hostages were taken on his watch due to October 7th. His government was in power on October 7th, no matter how much he tries to kind of ignore that or deflect from that responsibility, which he hasn't taken. And, opposition to Netanyahu and critics, in the public realm said, yes, you brought all the hostages home, but over 40 of them were taken alive and came back in body bags, right? And a lot of them could have been brought back earlier and would have been alive. And this comes to the crux of it, could Netanyahu have agreed to ceasefire and hostage deals earlier, and not just when he was forced to by, primarily Donald Trump last January and then last October. So it's all well and good for the prime minister to get up and take credit for, bringing all the hostages home. But all of us who have been kind of dealing with this and following this closely for over 2 years knows that left to his own devices, left to his own coalition partners, it's unlikely that Netanyahu would have agreed to those ceasefire deals. When he did, even though they, by an overwhelming margin, were the reasons the vast majority of hostages came back alive. So that's just kind of the politics of it all. And then kind of the second interesting political tidbit, Netanyahu attended Gvili's funeral the next day in Meital, down south. And that's the first time Netanyahu has attended anyone's funeral, any hostage, any fallen soldier, the first time. It's likely because A, the last hostage, so it's positive news, right? It's a closure that we were talking about. And B, the Gvili family seem to be more supportive of Netanyahu and the government than perhaps other hostage families and the families of fallen soldiers. So he likely felt a bit more comfortable going there. And so that happened. So yes, Gvili is home. This kind of terrible chapter in Israeli, not just Israeli, right? Israeli, Jewish, and I'd say world history is over, thankfully. And now we're left with, I guess it's post-war Gaza, but I guess mid-ceasefire Gaza and what comes next.
Israel Policy Forum is a policy organization rooted in the Jewish community. Our mission is to build support for a secure, Jewish, democratic Israel through a viable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, advancing pragmatic U.S. policy towards the conflict, U.S.-Israel relations, and regional diplomacy among policymakers and community leaders. We promote policy measures endorsed by credible security experts, develop analysis and commentary, and convene programs that engage and educate leaders across the political, denominational, and generational spectrums. Our Young Professionals initiative, IPF Atid, works to elevate the discourse among next-generation leaders by building community and facilitating engaging programs related to Israeli-Palestinian affairs. To learn more about our work, visit us online at israelpolicyforum.org and follow us on social media. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible and nuanced analysis, please make a tax-deductible gift today at ipf.li/supportthepod or at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
What about the Rafah border crossing? That's meant to be reopened now that we're in phase 2 of the ceasefire, but I know there are some obstacles to its reopening, and of course it's critical for freedom of movement for Palestinians and for medical care.
So, yes, we'll get to the Rafah crossing, which opened yesterday, Monday, officially for the movement of Palestinians into and out of Gaza. So that's the border crossing that connects Gaza to Egypt, Egyptian Sinai. And it was the main border crossing, pedestrian border crossing before the war for Palestinians in Gaza to get in and out of the Strip. It's mostly been closed for the past year and a half since the IDF took Rafah and southern Gaza in May of 2024. And it was opened during last January's ceasefire for a few weeks and then closed. So now it's open, and that's all for the good. And that's just part of the beginning of phase 2 of the ceasefire. So the American team led by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff officially announced the beginning of phase 2 in recent weeks. And this is kind of the official start. Obviously, before the Rafah crossing was opened on Monday, there was the announcement of the Board of Peace, chaired by Donald J. Trump, and then the executive board underneath it that Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair, and others are part of. And then in this kind of Russian doll underneath the executive board, there's the High Representative for the Gaza Strip, led by former UN envoy Nikolai Mladenov, a good guy, very capable, used to serve here in Jerusalem on behalf of the UN, again, kind of brokering, I don't want to say peace, but various ceasefires and diplomatic arrangements between Israel and the Palestinians quite effectively at the time. So he's now the High Representative for Gaza and the representative for the executive board vis-a-vis the fourth level of this new kind of governance scheme for Gaza, which is the Palestinian Technocratic Committee, effectively a new government for the Gaza Strip, officially called the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, NCAG, 14-member body filled with various kind of Palestinian technocrats, non-Hamas, I'd say close to the Palestinian Authority, and we can maybe get into the semantics of it all. But basically, this is the new kind of governing structure of Gaza. So it's part of the movement into phase 2, and especially given Ran Gvili's return, which paved the way for things like the reopening of the Rafah crossing, as I mentioned. Ideally, now we're going to be seeing other steps taken by this new, essentially, government for Gaza, like kind of increased aid, increased kind of housing, prefab housing units, increased kind of health assistance, clinics and the like. And really, the idea is that they're going to start taking over the Gaza's civil service away from Hamas. And that, by the way, Hamas has agreed to in their kind of beneficence. They're like, okay, we're at least in theory and officially going to hand over civilian affairs in the Gaza Strip to this new Gazan government that was created by, chaperoned and shepherded by the Americans, by the Trump administration, who really kind of own this issue now. Let's not mince words. So when you say, Netanyahu dragging his feet, maybe somewhat, but really there's only so much he can do because, the president's son-in-law is kind of leading the charge, and you don't want to get on the bad side, not of Jared, I imagine, but of the father-in-law, as we all know. So really the idea is that this kind of starts a process where this new government for the Gaza Strip starts taking over the civil service, think, teachers, nurses, hospitals, facilitates the entry of more aid, more humanitarian goods and the like. In theory, facilitates more donor funding, right? Because we're now in a different stage of the ceasefire. Remains to be seen if foreign donors kind of show up. And then the big issue really, and the big issue on everyone's mind is, okay, what happens to Hamas's guns, which is also part of the second phase of the ceasefire. And also, are we going to see an actual kind of international peacekeeping force, what they call an international stabilization force, the ISF, that will go in and kind of, I don't want to say disarm Hamas because they're not going to disarm Hamas, but kind of monitor the ceasefire and facilitate better security and law and order. So that's essentially what we're looking at, big picture. But, it's very easy to kind of be cynical and pessimistic about the chances of this kind of scheme working out with various levels and various boards and committees that, I do this for a living, so I kind of have to understand and follow it. But, I've had to explain this to various people, civilians, lay people, how this thing actually works. And, so wait, Jared Kushner is going to be running Gaza? And I was like, well, not officially, but yes. But then they have this Bulgarian diplomat, Mladenov, who's going to oversee the Palestinians that are now responsible for running Gaza and kind of taking it away from Hamas. And then they asked me, are these new Palestinians, are they Palestinian Authority? I was like, well, no, not officially, but kind of. So again, very messy, but like I said, it's very easy to kind of poo-poo it and be cynical, but this is the only game in town. So they are moving forward. The Trump administration wants to see this succeed, but it'll take a lot of time, money, effort, and patience. It's not going to, you're not going to rebuild definitely not rebuild, but undo kind of 2.5 years of war that Hamas brought on this small piece of land, just devastation overnight. And so you have to wish them the best of luck, and even in the best of circumstances, which these are not, it's going to be a very difficult job. But I think initially they're going to try to show the Palestinian public in Gaza that they can deliver. So what they call like quick wins, kind of improve the situation, and then try to build off of that. But yeah, the big issue really is can they get Hamas to disarm? How will that work? There are various ideas floating around. I mean, that should hopefully happen or begin to happen in the coming weeks, months.
What does it actually look like to reopen the Rafah crossing when you have Israel, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, the U.S., Egypt, all these different parties involved and trying to navigate the different needs of each one?
So, yeah, it's a bit complicated. Effectively, the IDF still controls southern Gaza, right? The Rafah governorate. So basically the southern frontier of Gaza bordering Egypt, still IDF-controlled territory. But then you have this border crossing between Gaza and Egypt that has now been reopened for people from Gaza to leave, and then Gazans from the outside coming back in. The actual crossing is going to be manned by, how shall I put this, Shanie? Palestinian security officials, obviously not Hamas, but officially that are kind of affiliated, but not officially with the Palestinian Authority, right? So not really officially Palestinian Authority security personnel, even though they are, shall we say, loosely affiliated with them. And the semantics, for the reason for the semantics will become very clear to everyone in just a second. And on top of that, you have European Union border monitors also at the checkpoint monitoring things. Again, what they actually will do remains to be seen. This is, by the way, a legacy of 21 years ago when Israel first withdrew from the Gaza Strip, and they had this whole kind of system in place, again, for monitoring the comings and goings between Gaza and Egypt. That lasted about as long as Palestinian Authority control over Gaza, which was not very long before Hamas, as we all know, took over in a violent coup in 2007. So again, these European monitors have been kind of hanging around here in Israel in one form or another for 21 years, and now they have been deployed once again. So hopefully this time the mission is more successful, but obviously kind of a bit away from the actual crossing inside Gaza. You have IDF and also Shin Bet, kind of internal security, monitoring who's coming and going. Israel is provided kind of a list and has to agree to the comings and goings in and out of Gaza, as do the Egyptians on their side, which is also a closed military zone now for many years. So again, it's tightly controlled, the border crossing. It's only for people, not goods, but it should hopefully, ease a lot of the kind of day-to-day suffering on a real level of people in Gaza needing to get out, especially for medical treatment, and also the suffering of people on the outside of Gaza that really want to get in and go back either to see loved ones or to go back to property, or because, well, living in kind of exile in Egypt, while obviously safer than being in Gaza, may not be all that easy either if you can't work and you're running out of money. So there are obviously like reasons for people to both go in and go out. So it's a big deal for Gazans. It's a big deal for the new kind of government of Gaza led by these 14 technocrats. So that's why it was a point of emphasis in the negotiations and the ceasefire, especially now, and why hopefully it will work. But again, there was this big brouhaha, if we go back to Israeli politics, domestic politics. So there was a big brouhaha here in Israel because, well, you reopen the Rafah crossing, but Hamas is still exists, right? So, short of total victory, now the Netanyahu government reopened the Rafah crossing after it made kind of the Rafah crossing and the frontier between Gaza and Egypt this kind of existential Israeli concern previous years to, for various reasons having to do with Netanyahu's domestic position and ongoing ceasefire talks. We don't need to kind of belabor that point. I think you and I talked about it at the time. So that was not a cap in Netanyahu's feather, just domestically, that this was allowed to reopen, even though Netanyahu agreed.
Feather in his cap.
But not a feather in his cap. So a negative feather. He has negative feathers in a cap that he doesn't wear. But again, it's the, it's kind of the domestic politics of in Israel of the Gaza ceasefire. Fine. But then last night, some sharp-eyed reporters and analysts, I don't know who first noticed it. It's an open debate. But basically on social media, on Twitter, you had this kind of groundswell of reports saying that the new Technocratic Committee for Gaza, the NCAG, had changed its logo. So basically, it had one logo when it was created 2 weeks ago. And then yesterday, it changed its logo. And the logo is strikingly similar to the crest with this kind of left-facing eagle of the Palestinian Authority. And you can imagine what the reaction was inside Israel. Oh, look, the Palestinian Authority is back in Gaza. Netanyahu, U.S. Prime Minister, have been promising for 2+ years, no Hamas, no PA. But the PA, look, Technocratic Committee is, a lot of these former or, affiliated guys to the PA. You have PA security at the Rafah border crossing, and now they have, God forbid, the same logo. So Netanyahu, late Monday night, his office issued a statement. Believe me, they don't react this quickly to actual things that happen here unless it serves their interest. So they realized it was a political problem and they tried to kind of put out that fire. It remains unclear who approved, whose idea it was to change the logo. I'm still trying to figure that out. And Netanyahu said, we didn't agree to this logo. It wasn't what was presented to us, a few weeks ago. They again vowed the Palestinian Authority will not go back into Gaza. Fine, they can say whatever they want for public consumption here in Israel, but the reality on the ground is the same as it was on October 8th, 2023, Shanie. And what you and I have discussed, what our colleagues Michael Koplow and Shira Efron have discussed ad nauseum, the day after the war, when it ever will come, you don't have many options to choose from in terms of a non-Hamas administration for Gaza. So if it's not Hamas and Netanyahu refuses to countenance the Palestinian Authority, they have to create this new entity that is, quasi-Palestinian Authority. Again, I think there's obviously a substance to it, but it's mostly semantics because ultimately these people need to kind of deliver and succeed on their own terms. They'll obviously have to get buy-in and cooperate with the Palestinian Authority that sits in Ramallah and the West Bank. And obviously they will have to try to the best of their abilities to kind of shunt Hamas to the side and undermine them both politically, economically, and probably most importantly, militarily in security terms. And that will be the real test.
Mm-hmm. So can we move now to my side of the ocean?
Please. Between Iran and Gaza and Bibi Netanyahu, please save me by talking about your neck of the woods. But I am curious, Shanie, because all kidding aside, last time we spoke, you remember what day it was, right? It was literally election day.
Oh, yeah.
In New York City. I was in New York City. The results, I think, were kind of preordained.
Yeah, I think we already knew. Luckily, we predicted the right way. It's always tough when you have to record the morning of an election, but I think it was pretty clear already who was going to win.
And let me tell you, that night, I went to my favorite burger place in the East Village. And it was fairly empty, but they obviously had the TV on. And I was sitting at the bar having this amazing burger. And it was, a small kind of watch party for the election results. And everyone there, because it's the East Village, obviously was very happy with the results. But then, I got to talking to the bartender and the various other people at the bar. And they asked me, where are you coming in from? Because I told them, I used to come here a lot. This is my favorite burger place in the whole city. I said, I'm in from Tel Aviv. And the look on their faces was priceless. They're like, oh. I was like, no, don't worry. I'm not one, to pass judgment, et cetera, et cetera. I obviously told them I personally wouldn't vote for Mamdani, but then they very patiently explained to me why they voted for Mamdani. I was like, okay. But I'm very curious. 3 months in, after the election day and 1 month after Mamdani was sworn in, what is life like in New York City?
Sure. Well, of course, anti-Semitism is the first thing on all of our minds. Although I will remind folks, as I'm sure they reminded you, those people at the burger shop, that most New Yorkers are not voting for the mayor based on his Israel views, and that's okay. That makes sense for the majority of New Yorkers. But of course, this is Israel Policy Pod, so that's what we will focus on, and how it influences the Jewish community. One of the first things he did was revoke, I think the words revoke, all of Eric Adams's executive orders. And that included one that enshrined the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, without replacing it with something else. So what does that mean? There isn't a working definition of anti-Semitism to guide anti-Semitism task forces and the like. Now, many will say, and this is true, that most types of hatred don't have definitions. You don't have to outline what does anti-Black racism look like? What does Islamophobia look like? Those aren't actually outlined anywhere generally. But of course, when it comes to anti-Semitism, there's a lot of contradictory opinions, a lot of controversy around what anti-Semitism is. Where do anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism intersect? Is it always? Is it never? Is it somewhere in between? What types of anti-Zionism are problematic, what are not? Or are they inherently problematic, anti-Semitic, right? These are the kind of questions being asked by a lot of institutions and a lot of Jewish community leaders and a lot of politicians. And so many in our community feel that there should be some kind of definition. Eric Adams had one, and now there isn't one. So just name that as a piece of this conversation that's happening here.
And that's like a symbolic move by Mamdani for the American Jewish community, or people living in New York, or is it substance, has substance to it?
I would venture to guess if you spoke to him about the IRA definition, he would not endorse it. There are other definitions of anti-Semitism out there. There are two other prominent ones. It'll be interesting to see if he endorses one. For most people I've spoken to, think that he will just leave it sort of open-ended because it's too controversial to pick one or the other. I would venture to guess that Mamdani would not support the IRA definition of anti-Semitism if prompted. Most people in his political camp are pretty resistant to it, but him removing the definition was in the context of revoking all of Eric Adams' executive orders. I think it was about 20 of them. So I think 2 of them connected to anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism, but most of them did not have to do with our community. Of course, that's what we're going to focus on. I'll add that there is an Office to Combat Anti-Semitism that Eric Adams created. It's run by Rabbi Moshe Davis, and he did not close that office. It seems he plans to keep it open, which is great. Moshe is still running it as of right now, although it's been reported that Mamdani is interviewing candidates to lead it for his administration. I think it's important to say that the names that have been thrown out to run the anti-Semitism unit or the anti-Semitism office are progressive, definitely more progressive than Eric Adams would have chosen, but they're not anti-Israel. They're not anti-Zionists. I haven't seen anyone listed who's super radical, who the community would be in total opposition to. So I think that's important to say, although he hasn't, as of yet, actually selected a new lead.
Okay. And this whole thing that we see, especially from far away in terms of protests outside synagogues, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist protests, is that still an issue? Because it was his first week on the job or something like that?
Yeah, it's definitely still an issue. We definitely see a lot of folks worrying about that. The New York City Council has been proposing, there's some really practical types of legislation that you can use to address that. So Julie Menon is the speaker of the New York City Council, and she's viewed as being a lot more moderate than Mamdani on these sorts of things. The New York City Council launched an anti-Semitism task force specifically for this. NYPD released from their hate crimes unit that anti-Semitic incidents accounted for 57% of reported hate crimes in 2025, obviously. And about 10% of New Yorkers are Jewish.
Yep.
And I believe New York Jews were the targets of more hate crimes than any other group combined. So it's clearly an issue that's on every politician's mind in New York, or at least it should be. And the task force is being run out of the Jewish caucus. It's bipartisan. One of their initiatives is to try to get a longer perimeter, about 100 feet, around synagogues, and it would apply to mosques and churches too, to sort of limit the scale of the protests and get them a little bit further away from the institutions. But of course, the protesters argue that this is a violation of constitutional rights, freedom of assembly, right to protest. And so Mamdani, I don't think that he's actually made a decision on this yet. He can sort of decide if he wants to go forward or shut it down. But I think that that's a really practical way that they can keep us safer, that the state and the city can keep us safer. And I know Kathy Hochul, the governor, also is in favor of having a longer perimeter, because you have people really standing right outside or right around the corner from synagogues harassing people. And some of them are really, really radical. I would say it moves from anti-Israel to being, pro-violence, pro-terrorism. Some of them can be very, very extreme. So it is really scary.
I can only imagine. Well, I can't imagine it, but I can only imagine because I'm no longer there. And I guess, just final question in terms of Mamdani and then maybe big picture American Jewry writ large. Has it been a better month than expected? Has it been about what you expected? Worse than you expected?
I didn't expect very much to change in the near term, and not much has. The American Jews I speak to are not talking about it as much as I would expect unless they're in the political sphere, but I don't see people as stressed out. There was a lot of anxiety leading up to the election. Now that he's in office, I'm not hearing about it so much. I think a lot of people have this wait and see approach. Even from the pretty pro-Israel camp, a lot of folks are telling me, I guess we'll see what happens on this front or that front. But it's top of mind for folks. It's still top of mind. I think who he chooses to lead an anti-Semitism office, if he selects someone new, will have a big impact on how folks are feeling.
Okay.
But it is important to note that this New York City Council is sort of a counterweight to him in some ways. So there are a lot of Jewish legislators at the city council level, at the state level. There are a lot of people who support the Jewish community. And so I think that it's not as though Mamdani can run everything out of the city without any restrictions.
Right. Some would say it's very difficult to run anything out of the city, given his dependence on the state and also the federal government. So again, it was always going to be a tough job.
Yeah.
But hopefully he succeeds for the city, and hopefully he succeeds for his Jewish constituency as well.
Yeah. We'll see.
Shanie, great to see you as always.
Great to see you too, Neri.
I hope that by the time this podcast goes up, that we're not in the middle of a new Middle Eastern war. But like we always say, our listeners and viewers will be a lot smarter. And let us hope that they do actually meet on Friday and try to hash out a diplomatic solution, even though, well, A, it depends what kind of diplomatic solution we're talking about. And then B, for many people, any diplomatic solution at this point in time, given the weakness of the Islamic Republic, would be the wrong approach to take. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people here in Israel view it as a historic moment for the U.S. and or Israel, or the U.S. and Israel, to actually push them over the edge, over there in Tehran. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know if it's going to work. It's highly dangerous for everyone. So we shall see.
Good luck to us all.
Thanks, Shanie.
Bye, Neri.